On this episode of Three Food Memories, I'm joined by a most dashing English-Italian performer, a UK #1 album topping singer-songwriter. His songs have featured on EastEnders, The Vampire Diaries and Grey's Anatomy. He's also sung duets with Australia's Natalie Imbruglia and Kylie Minogue. But it's the stark parallels between him and the wonderfully untouchable Frank Sinatra that draw me to him. Like Frank, my guest is a masterful storyteller. Through his singing, captivating stage presence and personal anecdotes, he flips everyday stories into musical narratives, connecting his audience on a profound level time and time again. Giovanni Edgar Charles Galletto-Savoretti, or the artist professionally known as Jack, he joins me from Oxfordshire in the UK. Giovanni, welcome to Three Food Memories.
Charles, thank you for having me. I'm so moved. I've never been compared to Frank Sinatra before, so I'm a little choked up as we start.
Well, we'll let you there a little bit if you need some oxygen and air to get over that.
I need a moment.
It's all yours.
Need a moment after that introduction.
But that is what you do with your performances. I mean, you do sing, you play the guitar, and you do all that musical stuff, but you also tell stories.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out in this strange world that is the world of the singer-songwriter, I was always very moved by folk artists, the Simon and Garfunkels, Paul Simon especially, that duo, Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, James Taylor's. But with age, and definitely even with fatherhood, I really lent more into my Italian heritage and Italian music, and even Italian songwriters. There is a lot more crooning to it. There is a lot more opera, theater, cabaret, if you want, even at times, to it. So I'm glad you noticed that. I think that's something that's developed more with age than when I started out. When I started out, I was a very shy, guitar, no nonsense, just singing. But with time, I've realized that there's a lot of beauty behind bringing theater to music as well, when on stage.
I want to disagree with you you weren't very shy in the beginning because there was a little story about a US producer that suggested you change your surname. And what did you do when he said that?
He was English. I won't say names, but he was English. It was a big record label exec, and we're now actually dear friends. He came up to me many years later and didn't apologize, but he just congratulated me on the fact that I was still alive in this bizarre industry. It was actually Sinatra who I brought up because he sort of courted me for about 2 weeks. And then on the second week in his office, I'll never forget, he leaned back on his chairs, put his feet on the table, and said, "The only thing we'll have to change is your name." To which I responded, "Why?" And it was his answer that really upset me. He said, "Well, because with a name like that, we'll have to put you in the world music section of the record store." Now, I already hate the expression world music because it basically just means music not sung in English. So I don't like that expression in general. But to have someone sort of tell me that because of a name, my music was going to go into a sector. I've never liked genres. I've never liked being sort of shelved or put in a box, which is probably why my career has been more complicated, because I like to always have the freedom to change my mind and to change my way of expressing myself. But yeah, that was my first introduction to the music industry and how certain people can have opinions about stuff that it doesn't really mean as much to them as it does to me. So I realized to, try and be as much in control of my destiny when it comes to making music as possible.
Now, you and I have a belief that music and food are resistant to forgetting. You told me once that you have the same visceral response to music that Anthony Bourdain has to food. Tell me about this place of crossover that you see with him.
Well, I think there's something very connected between food and music, which is it's a very sort of introspective, individual mechanism of creation, but it is made to then be shared. And I've never really understood when people say, "Oh, I only make music for myself." Yes, I make music for myself, but always with the outlook of then being able to share it. And I think the great chefs, or Anthony Bourdain, so to speak, has the same approach to it. The thing I love about Anthony Bourdain is, I remember especially during lockdown, I mean, I've always been a fan, but during lockdown, I really dove into watching him a lot, mainly for the travel actually. It was just my sort of my missing that of travel in various cultures and different sounds and smells sort of thing. And he lets you live that through his show. But the one thing I really noticed was I consider him my favorite chef, but I've never seen him cook. And that sort of struck me at the time, thinking like, that's interesting. Why have I always considered Anthony Bourdain my favorite chef, yet I've never seen him cook? And it's because I love his enthusiasm for the process of eating food. And I'm very much the same. I don't consider myself a musician. I don't know how music works. I use music, but I don't know how it works. But my enthusiasm for it, I think you'll find it quite hard to match. If you sit with me and listen to a song, I'm the annoying guy that will sit there begging you to listen to every note, begging you to listen to every lyric. And I relate to Anthony Bourdain's character in a lot of his shows because that's his thing. It's not necessarily showing you how to chop an onion or when to put the olive oil or not to put the olive oil. It's more his enthusiasm for tasting it and talking to the people that have made it and the sort of the environment from which it's born. And I like to speak about music in the same way.
He also goes into the darker side of things, doesn't he? He goes into humanity, he goes into culture, he goes into people's responses to food. Do you do that with music?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the response that music creates to me is sometimes more interesting than the music itself. And I've learned that the good way and the hard way. We always say nobody needs poetry until you fall in love, or nobody needs poetry and music until somebody you love passes away. And then it is essential for life to keep you alive, to keep you going. You need poetry, you need art, you need music, you need delicious, comforting food. It's the same thing. So I think the visceral experience that comes due to the actual amalgamation of ingredients, whether it be food or music, I think the actual response is the fascinating majesty of it all, really.
You said you don't know how music works. How do you think it works?
I try not to think about it, to be quite honest. And that's why I've always loved it. And I have this argument a lot because I work with musicians. Everybody in my band is a phenomenal musician. And I don't feel that. And I'm not saying this in a faux humble way. I'm saying it in a genuine way. I just don't know how music works. I can't read music. I don't even know a single scale. And that's how I like it, because it kind of feels mine in that respect. Nobody's ever really told me how to do it. And those who have tried have failed miserably, which is why I could potentially be much better than I am. But that's not really what I'm looking for. It's the experience, the process that music allows me to have. That's the kind of deal I've made with music, is that I won't ask it too many questions as long as it keeps providing me with the process and the experience that continuously surprises me. It continuously excites me. Maybe I have low expectations, but I get very excited very easily when it comes to music. We were in the studio last week making the next record, and the band did a take, and they said, "How was that?" And my producer said to the band, "Jack's very excited." And my guitarist responded, "That doesn't mean anything." In other words, I get very excited very easily when it comes to music. Everything blows my mind when it comes to music. So,
well, speaking of blowing your mind and you getting so excited about things, I mean, all your three memories are all firsts. So what is it about the excitement of not the first memories, but the first of anything for you? Is there a discovery in the feeling of the first? Is it that's something that you hold to and remember?
Yeah, well, I think, I have a lot of flaws, a long, long list of flaws. But the one thing that I have that I'm very fortunate is I have zero expectations. And it's something that has served me really well through life, which is why the first of anything always excites me because I don't really have preconceived ideas about anything. And maybe some could say that's ignorance at times, but then ignorance is bliss. I do sometimes find myself finding a lot more pleasure in things that others don't, because I guess that lack of expectation means that the first is always impressive, I guess, to a degree, or fascinating at least. It might not be good, but even if it's bad, I'm still kind of in awe of it. So there's a lot to be said for, the first cut is the deepest. It's that old chestnut. And sometimes that may hurt, sometimes that may bring tremendous pleasure. But whatever it is, I'm always sort of enthusiastic with it.
Well, tell me what it was like the first time you picked up a guitar.
That's a good question. I don't really remember the exact first time I picked up the guitar, but I remember the first time I used a guitar for my benefit. I wasn't very good at school, to say the least. I was very enthusiastic again, like very engaged during class. Like I was sort of friends with all my teachers. I think that's the only reason I got through high school, because my teachers sort of felt for me. But I wasn't academic. And I remember the first time we were assigned to go home and write a poem. We were studying poetry in English class. I wrote a poem, and it was the first time I got a good grade. And everyone was so excited. My English teacher was excited. My parents were excited. I had never received anything above a C in my life. And by the way, it wasn't like I was suddenly Shakespeare. I think I got like a B. It's not like I got an A plus. I wrote an okay poem. But anyway, the enthusiasm was there from everyone. And I went home, and my mother said, I don't know why she said this, but she said, why don't you try putting it to music? And we had this guitar that my grandmother had left me, and it was covered with cobwebs. And, I'd never really sort of played with it, I don't think. But for some reason, I picked it up. And I wrote what I guess you would say was my first ever song. And I think it was that. It wasn't so much that I remember the first time playing the guitar, but I remember the first time using it, because when I then wrote that, the happiness it brought my mother at a time where happiness wasn't very much on her plate. She was going through quite a difficult time with the divorce from my father, etc. And it was just kind of two birds with one stone. I was expressing myself, I was learning something, but at the same time, my mother, it happened to be my mother, but the person receiving it was getting a lot from it too. And I think that was a bit of a love at first sight when it comes to making music for me. It was this thing that I could, I don't know, relieve myself of my burdens, of my weights, or just express myself. And somebody else would also benefit from it. And I really liked that trait.
Okay, so let's talk about your poetic first food memory. Full of joy, the first time you ever had In-N-Out burgers.
We're starting with a high level of sophistication here.
No expectation.
No expectation. Well,
in LA. So we've set the scene. In-N-Out burgers in LA.
Well, In-N-Out only exists in California. I believe there's like one restaurant in Nevada just as you pull into Vegas. But otherwise, many people have tried to buy this chain and brand. Anyway, I won't go into the history of In-N-Out. But I had arrived to LA. I was 17 years old. And I decided, this is also very much based on music. Growing up,
where were you living at the time?
I was living in Switzerland, but I was educated in American high school called the American School in Switzerland, in Lugano, in the south of Switzerland, just on the border with Italy near Lake Como. And I grew up with a lot of my teachers and my friends were all American. So I grew up very Americanized in this kind of little utopia. And all the music I listened to was kind of 60s and 70s California, Laurel Canyon-based music. So I had this fantasy about moving to California. And when I was 17, I graduated high school. I decided I was going to go. I was going to go work for a friend of mine in a shop called H. Lorenzo on Sunset, this clothes shop. And a friend of mine owns it. And his father had offered me a job because I'd finished high school. And I wanted to make some money before starting university in San Francisco. And I was actually flying on 9/11, and we ended up getting turned back. It was a pretty crazy story. But a week later, I begged my father that I want, because, American airspace was closed for about a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember after 9/11. But I was so adamant that I wanted to move to California. I remember insisting that I was going to go, even though it looked like at the time America was at war. It was a very strange time. And my father somehow agreed.
Much like it looks like now.
Yeah, much like it looks like now, to be fair. I mean, it's having a moment. In and out, quite literally. In and out of wars these days. But I ended up going. And I remember landing, and I was terrified. I was 17. The world was sort of upside down from like where it was 2 weeks before. It was quite a big deal. I was literally moving to the other side of the world from my family, and I'm very close to my family, so it was quite strange. But I remember being picked up at the airport by one of my closest friends, get in the car, and he just said, "Welcome to LA." And he pulled in. There's an In-N-Out right next to LAX. And he was like, "Welcome to LA. This is what LA is all about, my friend." And he also taught me there's a little code that you order a double animal style. It's not on the menu. It's not on the menu. This is off menu. I'm giving you some serious information here, which probably most people, anybody who lives in California will know this already. But if you don't, if you ever go to In-N-Out, you order the double animal style. It's caramelized onions. It adds a little bit of je ne sais quoi to the experience. But I'm honestly not exaggerating this. I mean, this would probably be my sort of death row last meal. It was the greatest thing I had ever eaten in my life. And I'm embarrassed.
And you'd not had
to say,
hamburgers before. You'd had hamburgers before, yes.
Yeah, I'd had cheeseburgers before. I love cheeseburgers. I've been to America many times. Like I grew up going to the States a lot, but I'd never had an In-N-Out. And anybody who's had an In-N-Out, I think, will understand my enthusiasm here. But I'm ashamed to say that there's been times where I've been in LA later on in life for work, and I've had lunch and dinner out on the same day. I mean, there's something about it that just reached into my soul, and yeah, it gives me tremendous happiness. I'm a big fan of the In-N-Out burger.
What is the classic thing that you order when you're there?
That's the one.
Animal?
It's the double animal style. There's a special sauce that, every restaurant claims to have a special sauce for their burgers. But the In-N-Out special sauce is a different level. And also the fries. The fries are a point of debate because they're like apparently healthy fries compared to other fast food joints. But I'm not a massive fan of the fries. I always think they taste a bit raw. But the burger in itself, yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, you have no idea how often I fantasize about being able to go to In-N-Out just to order a double animal-style cheeseburger.
And what are you drinking with it?
Coca-Cola, and it's very strange because it belongs... I'm not sure if they're Mormon or the family that owns it is very religious. Another little insight, next time you're at In-N-Out, if you ever go to In-N-Out, if you look at the bottom of your Coke cup or whatever soft drink you're drinking, there's always a passage from the Bible written on the back, like it'll say John 4, I don't know many passages, but it'll say a passage from the Bible. So that's another little sort of insight.
So it's like going to church. It's getting a fix. It's in and out. You go to church.
I love that. It is literally like going to church for me. It's a spiritual experience. It really is.
Now, in Australia, we love beetroot. I know Italians, in the villages feed beetroot to the donkeys. We love beetroot on hamburgers. Have you ever had beetroot on? Oh, well, yes. It's kind of part
hamburgers?
of. We have a burger, like a burger with a lot. Sometimes it can be. If you go to a classic takeaway place, you can get a burger with pineapple rings from a can, bacon, cheese, beetroot and all and iceberg lettuce, and and then they wrap it up in really tight paper so all the juices just squeeze through, and the beetroot stains everything.
I like the wrapping mechanism you're talking about. In-N-Out does the same thing. They properly tighten it up so that it literally is like leaking, and I love that too. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if I can get on board with the beetroot and pineapple on the burger.
Save it for the donkeys.
For the donkeys. Well, it is a little bit like pineapple on a pizza. It's giving me that kind of vibe.
What do you feel about pineapple on a pizza?
I don't feel it shouldn't exist. I don't feel about it because it shouldn't exist. I don't try to make it. I don't want to even accept it as a reality. Although it's funny, I was in Naples recently, and the Mecca, the holy land of pizza, and they're getting a bit adventurous even in Napoli. Like I think a lot of it because of tourism. But you've got in Italy, it's very typical to have sort of frankfurters on a pizza. Fries, they're putting fries on pizza now in Naples. This is in Naples. So I was really shocked to see this kind of new wave pizza exploration in Napoli.
And as an Italian, how do you feel about that, having it having the traditions carved up?
Look, as an Italian, I think you have to understand that most traditional Italian food comes from exploration and travel. Italians like to claim them and make it better, but there's many theories. Pizza, I don't want to get into this because I don't want to start I don't want to have people attacking the show. But pizza, pasta, and all this, Italy, tomatoes come from the Americas. And so Italy has always, revolutionized its culinary culture through travel and experience. So I think that should continue. I think that should be the tradition rather than getting stuck in old recipes.
You have a very engaged legion of followers and fans. I scroll through your social media. I've watched some of your concerts on YouTube, and everybody is there with you. They're engaged. They're listening. They're hanging. They're waiting for your next note. Blah 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 blah. How do you see your fans?
Oh, great question. I see them as that. Like, it goes back to what I was saying before about when I wrote my first song for my mother. I don't want to say this in like a sort of that's why I do it, but it is. It is. That connection is why I love music. Of course, I love the introspective, self-healing, self-gratifying, self-exploration that music gives you. But the fundamental thing is, so I always think like songwriting is digging for treasure, performing is showing people what you found. That's always how I visualize it or explain it to people. I love that connection you have with people when you show them a treasure you found. And so when it comes to our fans, apart from the fact that I owe them everything, I wouldn't be able to dig for treasure if they weren't there to then ask me, what have I found?
One of your first records is called Singing for Strangers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was actually something my daughter said when asked, what does your dad do? And she said, he goes around the world singing to strangers. And at first I thought, what? And then I was like, she's actually it's as simple as that, I guess, to a degree. But what's important, and this is going to sound incredibly corny, but what's important is that if you arrive to our show as a stranger, you do leave as a friend. And I hope that does happen. If I do my job right, you shouldn't feel like a stranger at the end of our show. If you do feel like a stranger at the end of my show, I haven't done my job, is kind of how I feel.
The audiences around, are they different from around the world? Is there a specific flavor?
Yeah, I think they're different. I mean, it's the same all over, but I think the difference, I would say, is how they discover my music is different in various countries. So fundamentally, that will be the thing. In certain countries, it'll be a particular radio station that has shared my music with an audience. In another country, it'll be a TV show. Therefore, the audience will sort of reflect more that TV show than my music to begin with, and then slowly that'll change. Or there'll be like a remix. Every country has a different sort of way or it'll be a different song. Like I said, I don't really have a genre. Like, I'm not a folk, I'm not rock, I'm not pop, I'm not reggae. I'm influenced by a lot of stuff, and I just made an Italian album. The album before that was called Europeana. The one before that was Singing to Strangers. This is recorded in Rome. There's a variation of I try never to make the same album twice, so to speak. So depending on what song has kind of attracted the larger group of the audience, it'll change. It'll be really interesting. I mean, we played Romania last summer. I'd been to Romania, but never for music. And we played this sort of 10,000 people arena. And it was incredibly young. There was a real vibrancy to this audience. And it really surprised me. And it was because I'd had this sort of remix of a song in Romania that had done really well. So the audience was much younger. And then I went to Greece 2 weeks later, and Singing to Strangers, that album in itself was particularly very successful in Greece. And I think it's because it's a very Mediterranean sounding album.
Also too, I just want to say for a second, there is a Greek saying somewhere with Greeks, we dance when we're No, no, no. We party when we're happy, and we dance when we dance when we're melancholy.
Yeah, I love that.
So there is that thing about strangers and melancholy that the Greeks would have netted to.
Well, that album is incredibly melancholic. Is it is it's not really an homage to Italian music from the 60s, but it kind of is. I mean, I went to Rome and recorded at Ennio Morricone's studio, one of my favorite composers.
He's the guy that wrote the score for uh,
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly,
the
all of the spaghetti westerns, but
yeah, yeah,
also
yeah,
Cinema
and
Paradiso,
yes,
Quentin Tarantino's Django. I think he did Django. I think he actually won an Oscar for yeah, for Django. I think that's the only time Ennio Morricone has actually won an Oscar, which is kind of criminal, but that's for another podcast. That's for another time.
we have a whole pod. We've got another episode with all the latest.
With all the controversial discussions. But yeah, but that in itself, it was amazing because the studio where we played, it's the Forum. It's under this incredible sort of cathedral in Piazza Euclide in Rome, and it's the basement of this church. And when you walk in, it is literally exactly the same as it was in the 60s. I mean, you can smell cigarettes on every wall. The color of the carpets are like yellow and this weird turquoise blue. But it's awesome. I mean, what I'm describing sounds potentially horrific, but it's really cool. It's kind of Italy's Abbey Road. It's one of those sort of studios. So it was impossible to go in there and not, it was in the walls. Italian history of music was literally, sticking on the walls, literally, some of it. You still had ashtrays on the mixing desk. There was actual ashtrays built into the mixing desk. And it was just very cool. And you hear that in the album. And I think that nostalgia and that melancholy is why a lot of Eastern Europe and a lot of the sort of Mediterranean side of Europe really related to that album. So it's always different. I've done albums in the past. I did my second album at Jackson Brown Studio in Santa Monica. And funnily enough, that album worked much better in the States than it did in most places. So it goes back to what we were saying before. The environment in which the music is being made has an effect on how the music is received, for sure.
And I mean, that's also talks to your enthusiasm about exploring and looking at different things and trying new mediums. Because when I look to dissect your music, which is I shouldn't because there's so much in it. There is that 50s, 60 influence. I hear a bit of Cat Stevens that you backed up with a lyric just before First Cut is the Deepest. There's some Joni Mitchell. I then hear some Julio Iglesias in there who I adore. And then you chuck in a bit of Daft Punk-ism. So I've got folk, soul and pop. I mean, my question to you is where do you think your audience most connect to the music that you and your band create?
I think in the storytelling. I just did a solo tour, for example, which I haven't played. I love playing with the band. I love traveling with the band. I love just being with the band. We're like a sort of literally band of brothers on the road. Some of us have been working together for almost 20 years. So we've all been together for a long time. But I went out solo and it was really interesting I learned a lot about my audience that way because it was a storytelling night. It wasn't really a performance, and I really felt like that's a lot to do with why we have an audience and you mentioned it at the beginning with your introduction, and I really appreciate that. The storytelling.
I spent a lot of time with you.
Well, you nailed it. Well, I mean, at least for me. I was flattered, but I also appreciate that you noticed that because, to me, songwriting isn't about finding the hook or finding necessarily a catchy melody as much as I loved and admire the craft of all of that. It's the storytelling. I've always loved the storytelling, I come from music meant a lot to me as a kid, but it really hit home when I discovered Simon and Garfunkel, Tom Waits, Chris Christopherson, Johnny Cash. And that's when music went from being entertaining to being meaningful. And so to me, the storytelling aspect of songwriting is what I think my audience connect to the most, because I think it's what I connect to the most. So when I'm at the peak of authenticity, I think that's when my audience is at the peak of enthusiasm. And I think it's like that with any artist. If you're a great performer and, once you find the highest level of your performance, that makes you authentic. That's what your crowd will love. That's what your audience is there to see. You at your best, at your most authentic self. And I think I'm at my most authentic when I'm telling a story.
Let's talk about another story. One of your heroes sent you some lyrics and you had to do something with them. Bob Dylan.
Yeah, that was no pressure there at all.
So start from the beginning, because I got it in bits.
So I covered a song. I discovered a song going back to, I just said I recorded my second album at Jackson Browne's studio in Santa Monica. And while I was there, a guy played me. They had all this, like, Bob Dylan uses Jackson Browne's studio to rehearse. So there was all this kind of like Dylan paraphernalia everywhere. He had left his hat there, his coat, his scarf, and he was coming to pick it up a few days later. And so I started talking to the engineer and the guys that worked there. And they played me some like unreleased Bob Dylan stuff. They had all this stuff around them. And I heard this song called Sept You, Nobody Sept You, which kind of gave me the courage to propose to my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. It was sort of a real like slap in the face song, one of those ones. And I covered this song and I released it. And Bob Dylan's management heard it and liked it. And they reached out to my management in the States and said, we've got some lyrics that Bob hasn't used. We found some lyrics from the 90s that Bob hasn't used. Would Jack be interested in maybe looking at them or doing something with them? And I think they reached out to a few artists with this. So I got these 2 emails, signed Bob underneath, which was quite cool. I don't think they were from Bob directly. I think they were just from his team. I'd love to say that, Bob and I met in a coffee shop in Marrakesh and, while smoking shisha, we decided to write together. That didn't happen. It was quite sort of, strange. I just got these emails of 2 poems of Bob Dylan. One poem meant nothing to me. It sort of, I read it and I was like, it was a bit far out, a bit obscure, as Bob Dylan so wonderfully can be. But the second one was this poem called Touchy Situation. And it was as if he'd been reading my mail at the time. Like, it was so on point with what I was going through or what life was having me experience. And I remember I got them like first thing in the morning and I was sat in my kitchen drinking coffee with my guitar, playing it. And I told my wife what was going on and I was doing it. And everything I was doing, she goes, baby, it just sounds like a rubbish Bob Dylan song. Like, stop it. Because it was impossible while playing the guitar and reading Dylan lyrics not to sing like Dylan. Like, not to, it sounded like I was imitating him because of how he phrases things. They are obviously so Dylan. Anyway, cut a long story short, I then went to the piano and the lyric is Touchy Situation. And I remember sort of onomatopoeically almost playing the piano like the word touchy, like just, staccato, so to speak. And the minute I did that, I felt like I took Bob Dylan's lyrics and made it my song. My favorite part, though, about the whole thing is because then I recorded it, I wrote it, I recorded it. We had to send it over to Dylan's team and everything to get okay that we could do it. Did he like it? Whatever. Anyway, we got the thumbs up that we could use it. So when I made the album, it's actually on Singing to Strangers. I made the old school LP, and on the song track listing on the records, I did it like the old school records where it says the songwriters underneath, and I put J. Savoretti / B. Dylan on the thing, and that's probably the coolest thing I've ever done in my career.
I think there are buckets of other cool things that you've done.
Yeah, but it was up there. Just having that Savoretti B. Dylan is definitely up there.
Now let's talk about how music has changed just briefly. I did a road trip with my kids over the weekend, and Papa put MJ on, and we heard Michael Jackson on high rotation. There was probably, I don't know, he's got such big. And the boys, as we were driving, they said, Papa, why is there no swearing? And why is he singing about the world and people being friends? And it was for 10-year-olds to make those observations. And then I started thinking about, well, the way music is being, those songs are 30, 40 years old. Now, and I think the boys just have them all over their playlists.
Same with
All
my
of Michael
son. My
Jackson's
son's
songs.
obsessed with Michael Jackson.
Yeah, and it's just this their discovery of. But then I started thinking about, well, not only has the way that music is made changed, it's the way it's being produced and played has also changed. I'm seeing more and more artists produce vinyl. I'm seeing more and more listeners and audiences using turntables. Do you think people are reaching out for old sounds that are familiar?
Yes, I do, and I think they're also reaching out for the experience. I think music has always changed because of technology. You know, the idea that we get to a chorus by 1 minute was defined in the 50s by radio stations realizing that after 1 minute people change station if they don't like the song. Nowadays, people change on Spotify or iTunes or whatever they use, Apple Music. They change after 14 to 17 seconds. Producers have started putting hooks at the beginning of the song so that people don't do that. So art has always kind of followed the technological, has responded to technology. I think, though, having said that, nowadays people are so used to, like, if you ask a lot of young people, what kind of music are you into? You know, they'll say hip hop, and you'll say, who's your favorite rapper? And they don't have one. They just like hip hop, and they'll listen to a hip hop playlist, or they'll listen to I don't know, jazz, but they won't really dive in to the experience of the artist. I think people are now, because that's so oversaturated, I think people are looking for connection again, like I said, and the idea of putting on a record, having the record sleeve, knowing a bit more about the band or the artist or the culture behind how the music was made, where it was made, who it was made by. I think people are looking for a little bit of that, a little bit more to make the music they listen to a bit more personal, not just this transient sort of commodity that comes and goes weekly. You know, 150,000 songs are uploaded a day to most streaming services. And now most streaming services are using AI to generate, I don't want to say fake artists, but essentially artificial artists, and just shoving them on playlists with a bunch of real artists, and nobody's noticing the difference. And so that is happening, and there's no stopping that. But I think because of that, people are going to lean towards what you just said, having that connection, having that personal effect. And the record, albeit something, I guess, you know, it's not real. It is. It's tangible. You can hold it. It's more tangible than shuffle or playlist, you know, than clicking a button and then walking away for the next 3 hours. You know, changing the side. You're engaging with the music itself. And I think people are looking for that.
And then making sure the stylus just sits right at the right spot, just making sure you pull the little lever down.
You're part of it.
Yeah. And then as a kid, I always used to break the little diamond, and my father was like, he was all like Homer Simpson.
Fury.
It was always, don't go to the stereo. He'd be always at me. But I always having fun. But I do think at how music has changed, literally the sound of music. You go from vinyl, that big sort of scratchy, beautiful sound, and sometimes you'd hear a little piece of dust on if you'd never clean the record, to then the sound got compressed to CD, and we lose that quality. And then when we moved all our CDs to MP3 systems and all that, it then lost another quality. And I mourn the vinyl. I mourn that sound, and you go out.
You can also hear the sound of the room on vinyl. Like, you can hear the room in which it's recorded a lot better on vinyl. Although now you've got all this Atmos stuff and all this various technology. But it's funny, my daughter's 13, and she definitely went through her super pop-like phase. You know, as a kid, I brought her up on like Aretha Franklin, and I sort of really for some reason, always played a lot of sort of soul music when I was with my daughter. And then after that, she sort of rejected that and went with all of her mates, you know, when she sort of was about 10, 11, and started listening to all the various pop stuff. But now recently, I walked by her bedroom the other day, and I started hearing Fiona Apple, Alanis Morissette, Annie DiFranco, the Cranberries. She was listening to sort of this, I mean, what they would say is old music. I mean, it was music of our generation. And I asked her, I was like, how come you're listening to this? And she said, her answer really fascinated me. She said, everything else just sounds too perfect. And I was like, interesting. Like everything else essentially was just a bit too sanitized, you know? And she was looking for sort of human error. She was saying, like, she was looking for the scruffiness of how those albums used to be made, the imperfection, so to speak. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's funny enough, since she said that, I've noticed, especially out of Australia, because I think some of the best music is actually coming out of Australia right now. That is very much the zeitgeist of what's coming out of Australia. A bit like what happened with Americana music about 10 years ago. A lot of very raw music is coming out of Australia, whether it's bands or singer-songwriters. And a lot of them are referencing 90s music, the same way we reference the 60s. The same way I was super brought up, like I said at the beginning, by, my dream was to go to Laurel Canyon because that's where Crosby, Stills and Nash lived. That's where the Doors were. That's where Jackson Browne and Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Carole King. That was that world. Now these guys, every time I hear, like so many times I hear, I think it's Royal Otis, the amazing band from Australia, or Sons of the East. I'll hear Mazzy Star, in there, or I'll hear the various, 90s songwriters being influenced, being, referenced. So it's really interesting to see that.
It's your daughter's comments and my son's comments that give me hope for the future of our world. They're rejecting what is, and I'm not just talking about music. I'm just talking about all fads and everything they know of other, which really gives me, we'll get through this, whatever this is. But before we get through it, let's go to your second food memory. Having pesto as a child with your aunt, your Zia, what was Zia's name?
Puppa, Zia Puppa, we called her. Well, her name was Valeria, but we used to call her Auntie Puppa, Zia Puppa.
Is that everything?
In my family, it's very strange. We all have nicknames. So my grandmother was Nucci, my father was Pupi, my uncle was Pippo, my aunt was Pupa, my daughter now is Pinolo. Actually, Pinolo, which is what's used in pesto. That's why my daughter's nickname, my youngest daughter, who's 4, I call her Pinolo, which is a little pine nut, which is the main ingredient in Genovese pesto. And yeah, one of my earliest memories was as a child, we still go, but as a child, I used to go for sort of 2 months a year to Portofino, which was very different in the 80s to what it is now, but nevertheless as beautiful. And my aunt, my Zia Pupa, had a beautiful house up on the mountain of Portofino that literally looked out onto the Bay of Portofino. And whenever we would stay there, I would always remember, we'd always get there for some reason at night, and you have to take these little, they're called an ape, which is like a tuk-tuk. You can only get up these mountains with these very small sort of little cars because the roads were built to get up there long before cars were built. They were done for sort of, donkeys and carts and horses and carts sort of thing. But we would always get to her house at night, and in the morning you'd wake up and she would be sat outside with these other women, her friends, just sat outside with a pesto and mortar, literally sitting, just chatting while they were having breakfast, preparing lunch. And they'd be grinding the basil. And the reason Genovese pesto, which is sort of the classic pesto that we know, but the original, the real Genovese pesto is so amazing is because of the basil. The basil is so strong in Liguria, in that region, and it's so different. And I'm not saying that in like a cliche way. It genuinely is different tasting from most parts of Italy, let alone the rest of the Mediterranean. And it's because of where it's based, because it's kind of the mountain on the sea, so the soil is different, etc., etc. It was such a strong smell to wake up to. And yeah, it's left a mark. We make it now, starting now, we make it about once a week at home. And every time, still to this day, every time, whether I'm making it or my wife is making it, or sometimes even now my daughter makes it, the minute I smell the grinding of the basil, it's like a punch to the gut of nostalgia and melancholy in a positive way, not in a sad way, but it really, it never fails to sort of hit home.
And what would she serve it with?
Well, in Liguria, what we do with trofie is a typical thing, which are like sort of little I don't know how to explain trofi actually. Gnocchi is one thing, which I like potatoes, but in general in Liguria, trofi is classic. Or lasagna, just a flat sheet of pasta. When I say lasagna, I don't mean like lasagna with meat and stuff like that. I mean lasagna is in the actual pasta. Like it's a sheet of pasta essentially, lasagna. So you put one sheet like that and another one like that with pesto over it. But in Liguria, where my aunt would serve it, which is very typical, they serve it with potatoes and string beans, like long beans. I don't know what you call them. Yeah, so they add that too. That was the sort of typical. Always though, to start with, before you have it, you have a thing which is typically Genovese as well, which is fave salame, which is slices of salami with fava beans. So you just take the fava beans out, which are bitter, and you have them with the salami, which adds a bit of sweetness.
And what was, I mean, you speak about your aunt there being with her friends sitting around just grinding the pesto. Do you remember what they spoke about? Did you ever eavesdrop? Was there anything going on?
No, because a lot of the times they also spoke in Genovese dialect. Italy's a very young country. It's about 160, 170 years old. So it was a country based on regions before, they were all little kingdoms and regions. So every region is very strong, not only through its diet, through its food, but also through its language. So a Genovese dialect is still very strong. You still hear it when they speak in traditional. It's fascinating. But if you don't know it, it's nothing to do with Italian. Like bambino, which means child in Italian, in Genovese you'd say figlio. Like they have nothing to do with each other. So I never, even if I was listening, I wouldn't understand most of what they were saying. But it was this kind of continuously calm drone of like, sort of, it always sounded like there was a very sort of, a debate. Like they were always it always sounded like they were disagreeing, but they weren't. It was just this drone of connection, typically Italian.
And how do you and your wife Gemma make pesto?
So, there's only so much I can. There's only so much I can reveal because obviously there's family secrets. But it's very simple. It's very much about 2 to 3 fingers of olive oil, and then it all depends. I would say you need 1 basil plant for 2 people, or maybe per person.
One basil plant.
1 basil plant per person. So sort of, yeah. I mean, a general basil plant like.
This is like a Greek recipe that's passed down from.
Yeah, and then it's pine nuts, of course, and a lot of parmesan.
Do you roast the pine nuts?
No, I don't roast the pine nuts. I can add a little bit of zhuzh, but no. Straight pine nuts straight in, and then a lot of I like to use Parmesan. You can use pecorino. You can mix it, do 50-50. Some people, this is very controversial.
No judgment.
Put a drop of milk, like a very small drop of milk. We don't. I have been known to occasionally because it makes it a little just a little creamier. Like it's weird, pesto. The horrific pesto you get in jars in supermarkets and all this stuff is very dark green and all that. If you go to Genova and have pesto, I mean it's proper light pistachio green. Like it's nothing to do with the dark pesto you see when they put pesto on sandwiches or whatever, that sacrilegious thing. That's not for a Genovese person. Pesto in Ligurian pesto is very light green. And that's to do with a lot of cheese. And then sort of 1 or 2 cloves of garlic, depending how heavy. I like it quite heavy on the garlic, to be quite honest. My wife is not so keen on that. She prefers when it's lighter on the garlic. But every restaurant will have a different way of doing it. Every household will have they'll have one little secret thing. But that's essentially how we do it. Very simple.
And with pasta?
Yeah, we do it with spaghetti. We do it with spaghetti here. I've tried to do it with lasagna, but I haven't nailed the way of cook. I know it sounds silly, but the way of cooking just a sheet of pasta is actually more complicated.
Is there cheese? Is there cheese between the? No, it's just pesto.
No. It's literally a square of pasta, and then pesto, and then another square of pasta put a little bit differently, and then more pesto on that too.
And then what do you bake it and then cut it in?
No, that's it. No, that's it. So you boil the sheet of pasta, and then you put it down like that and put the pesto on. If you're that's a typically Portofino thing though. Like in Genoa, you won't really get lasagna al pesto. You'll get trofie al pesto, gnocchi al pesto, and spaghetti al pesto. But if you go to Portofino, which is a little bay where I sort of grew up just outside of Genoa, their lasagna al pesto is a typically Portofinese thing.
So let's talk about Genoa for a second. There is a street named after your grandfather.
Well, just outside of Genoa, there's a street named after my grandfather. In Genoa itself, there's a monument. It was just recent, the 25th of April is Liberation Day in Italy from fascism. And my grandfather was very important. He was one of the head of the partisans. The partisans were the sort of the anti-fascist sort of movement that grew in, like the resistance in France. In Italy, the partisans were very influential in defeating fascism and getting rid of the Germans, the Nazi Germans from Italy. And my grandfather was part of the Ligurian resistance, that region in Italy, which are very... The reason they're so proud, the reason I'm so proud as well, is because they were the only region to liberate themselves before the Allies arrived. The partisans liberated the region. My grandfather famously got this German general Meinhard to surrender before the Allies arrived. I actually have the document actually on my desk right here, where they actually signed the surrender. The Germans surrendered, and this was a big deal because they had been ordered, Genova being a port, when the Germans had it, they had all their cannons there pointing at sea. And upon sort of before surrendering, the Germans had been told to point the cannons inwards and basically destroy the city so that when the Allies came, they couldn't use the port, etc. My grandfather stopped that from happening with all of his comrades and partisans at the time. But yeah, he was a very important figure. So he's actually got a monument with his name in Genoa. He was a big personality, big boots to fill.
How do those stories get passed down, Jack, from that moment that had happened in the 1940s to now? Do you share those stories with your children and say your great grandfather?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have the document on my desk literally to show my kids all the time. Unfortunately, I don't think they get passed down enough. And I think we've stopped talking about that period in time too much, even in schools. In Italy, this is a bit of a problem, which is why we are seeing a return of fascist ideology. People aren't ashamed to, people until 10, 20 years ago, fascism was a dirty word in Italy, rightfully so, because of its past. But now it's having, I don't want to say it's having a comeback. This is looked throughout most of Europe and a lot of the world due to sort of populist and national movements. But I think our lack of education and understanding of it is why it does come back, because people have a very romantic idea of something that was horrific and aren't really fully, I think, aware of what they're on about. I don't want to justify people's ideologies by saying, oh, they're just a little bit ignorant. I think there is a lot of malice behind a lot of it too, but I think there is genuinely a lot of ignorance behind it, and which is why we need to talk about it more, so to speak, so that it doesn't happen again.
Do you think this talking about it more and getting things out in the open is what's influenced your music, is what it's actually perhaps connected your audience to you, because you're not afraid to talk, and the stuff that you say is probably stuff that everyone's feeling but not talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope that's sort of what I, it's, and music is wonderful in that way because it is a bit like an armor. You can say things freely. At least for me, it feels like that. You can say things freely. But it's weird. Since I was younger, like I wrote many songs about war when I was younger, and I've never experienced war. I am fortunate enough to be of the generation that has never seen it up close. But obviously, growing up with this narrative, with these stories, had an impact on me, and has been something that I've always had tremendous respect for, curiosity towards. And I was actually asked to play in Normandy last year for Remembrance Day, because I wrote a song called Soldier's Eyes. When I was about 21, I wrote this song. And I have no idea really why I wrote this song, why I had this sort of need to sing of this experience. But I'm assuming that it has to do with being educated and brought up with the knowledge of not only my grandfather, but of, because grandparents from both sides were very much affected from the World War II. But just as a European, as a European citizen, knowing about the history of this part of the world and having respect for it. I think that, and being educated strongly in it, I think is why I definitely will hear it a lot in my music, especially when I was younger.
Let's move on to your third food memory. Trying your first onion from Tropea last year with Moretti beer. Now, these Tropea onions are known as
Cipolla di
Cipolla
Tropea,
rossa.
cipolla rossa di Tropea. I was very ignorant about this. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about Calabria, which is a region in Italy, which I don't really want
But
to
you're
ruin.
from up there. You're from kind of...
I'm from Liguria.
Yeah.
I'm right on the border with France, on the Mediterranean, just as you come across the border with France. Calabria is exactly on the same side, but at the bottom. And I went for the first time last year. I was fortunate enough to do this amazing 5-day trip with Moretti Beer, where they asked me to come and explore some secret destinations in Italy that not many people know about, and experience the food and drink some delicious beer. So it was a pretty good deal.
Okay.
I said yes very quickly. Yeah, I agreed very quickly to partake in this adventure. And the first place we stopped, we went to Sicily, which is unbelievable. And I completely fell in love. My grandmother was Sicilian, so there was definitely a sense of homecoming when I went. But completely fell in love with Sicily. If anyone hasn't been, I highly recommend you go. Palermo is one of the coolest cities I've ever been to in my life. If I was 25 years old, I would move there tomorrow. But unfortunately, I'm not. But the first place we went to on the journey was in Calabria, a region called Calabria, Tropea. And I was so overwhelmed by the beauty, the untouched, the unspoiled element of this region in Italy. Not that Italy has been spoiled, God forbid. It's been able to retain a lot of its natural beauty, even with all tourism and the popularity that Italy has. It still retains a lot of its authenticity in a way that many other countries have lost, to be quite honest. So Italy is, I'm very proud of that as an Italian, and Italy should be. But Calabria even more so. Like, Calabria is really unspoiled, an unspoiled part of Italy that I was overwhelmed to come across. And the first day we were there, we were walking through Tropea, such a beautiful town. And there's a very famous Isola di Tropea. It's got this kind of like sort of little island just floating off of it with this castle on it. It's a beautiful part of the world. The sea is turquoise. Like, again, the beaches are unspoiled. You've got white sand, long white sand beaches, which in Italy is not that typical, funnily enough. Not on this side of the Mediterranean, at least, maybe on the Adriatic side, but on the Western Mediterranean side, you don't really get long, sprawling white beaches. You do in Sardinia, in Elba and all that, but not on the actual mainland. But down in Calabria, you do, like proper, almost Caribbean-style looking beaches. And we walk around, and there was this wonderful little pizzeria, and it was closed, but I happened to be looking through the door, like through the window, and this lovely gentleman opened up and said, come in, come in. And it was this old bread oven that had been used for 100 years and whatnot. And inside this bread oven, there was just a bunch of potatoes sitting there. And I asked him, why are these here? And he put them in there the night before. When he turns the ovens off at night, he puts the potatoes in and leaves them overnight. So while the oven is kind of cooling down, it cooks the potatoes overnight to a perfect, like, I've never tasted a potato like this. But he said, for this reason, and he just grabbed a bowl, sliced his potato, sliced these onions and covered it and said, here you go. Now, it was about 9:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. So I'm not going to lie, the idea of eating an onion at 9:30 in the morning, I was being polite, to say the least, when I dove in. But I can't put into words. I'm not even a fan of onions, to be fair. I mean, I like onions, but it's not something I crave. I love onions. I'll never remove an onion unless it's raw in a salad sort of thing. But anyway, moral of the story is this onion blew my mind. And the simplicity of it. And this is the beauty of Italian cooking, full stop. But in this particular case, it was almost like comedic how simple it was. Here's a potato with an onion on it. Try this. And of course, a little bit of olive oil. It was delicious. I can't put into my... And I didn't know, but Tropea is famous for this. They also look beautiful. They actually sell them when you walk by a sort of vegetable stand in Tropea, in Calabria in general. They look like flower shops because the vegetables are so beautifully presented. But the red onions, they're lush. The color is lush. They're almost pink rather than red. But yeah.
And what is their flavor?
Sweet. Really, really sweet. Like to the point where you think they've been caramelized for 3 days or something. Like you're like, how is this possible? What have you done to it? And that was what I said to him. I was like, what did you do to the onion? He goes, nothing. That's the taste of it. So yeah, I wanted to say, when you asked me about my food memories, the reason I really wanted to say this was not only for the onion of Tropea, but for Calabria, this region. This is a region of Italy that doesn't get recognized enough. And I think the cipolla of Tropea, the simplicity of this onion is kind of like a beautiful metaphor and like for Calabria in general. It's just an onion, but it's not just an onion, if you know what I mean. And Calabria is the same thing. Oh, it's just another part of Italy. No, it's not. Like, it is magnificent. And it's the same thing. It's run down, it's beaten up. It's not glamorous, so to speak. It's not it's not the Amalfi Coast. It's not all that. It's just an onion, so to speak, but it's incredible. It'll blow your mind. And I think that's a nice little sort of metaphor for that region.
Miss Italia, your most recent album, you performed a song on that, Ultime Parole, with my high school chum, Natalie. Now, I remember when she came back from the promotional tour, she said, I'm just doing this song in Italian and I've just come back with Jack, and he just connected me to my roots. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm in the romance with you, Nat. I'm here. Sweetheart, you don't speak a word of English. I mean, of Italian.
She speaks a little English, but no Italian. Just a little.
But she's gonna. It's on record. She's got me. She doesn't speak a stitch of Italian. How did you
Well,
get?
she does now.
Well, thanks to you, but not.
She does.
But she really. Tell me the process. How did you get her to?
Well, we were actually here at my house. We were sitting in the garden, drinking some good wine, and I said to her, "Listen, I'm doing an Italian album now," and it was a very. I didn't choose to do this album. It was an album I had to do. My father passed away, and it was a very cataclysmic moment. Anyone who's lost a parent knows it's a life-changing experience, obviously. And it was the first time I'd really experienced grief. The thing that really threw me about grief was it was a real physical thing. It really hurt. It was and at the same time it was quite numbing, bizarrely enough. Like anytime you get hurt to a certain degree, you don't feel anything else. And the only thing that really moved me, that allowed me to truly lean into the grief and learn from it and really experiencing it, laugh about it, cry about it, feel it, was when I listened to Italian music. That really connected me with the grief of losing my father, for obvious reasons, because he was my Italian, my connection to my Italian heritage. So I decided I need more of this. And I started writing in Italian and making Italian music and making this album. And I was telling Nat this story, and she was like, oh, I love that. She's like, I'd love to connect more to my Italian roots. So I said, well, why don't you get on board? Come on, get on this crazy ship that I've built here. And would you be up for doing something together in Italian? And I mean, this is why I love Nat. One of the many reasons I love Nat. She didn't even blink. She was like, yeah, let's do it. That gun-ho, I don't want to swear, but yeah, let's do it. And so we wrote this song, and it was really sweet. And also another thing I love about Nat was when we were in the studio, we wrote it with a wonderful another Australian friend of mine called Sam Dixon, who's an incredible bass player, who was Adele's musical director, and another friend of mine, Simone Zampieri, who's a great Italian writer, who really taught me how to write in Italian properly, so to speak. Because it's easy to write a bad song in Italian, but it's really hard to like, you really need to craft the language to do it properly. Like Italians take lyrics and poetry very, very seriously. You can't use colloquial day-to-day language like you do in English. You have to really go there. You have to craft it and master it. And he helped us. And when we were recording, when we were doing Nat's parts, she was so cool about, a lot of people, I actually really wanted to retain her. I liked the imperfections in her pronunciation. I thought it was very charming, as well as authentic, so to speak. But what I really respected about her was she was like, no, this isn't about me, Natalie. This is about Italy. I'm singing this properly in Italian. She's like, I am not letting my nonnas and my aunties and my zias hear me singing in Italian with an Australian accent or with an English accent. I've got to get this right. So my friend Simone Tampieri, who wrote with me, who's quite a character and doesn't mind saying things how they are, was very critical of her accent, like on the first take. And I thought Natalie was going to slap him around the face. Instead, she was just like, no, instead she did the opposite. She was like, bring it on. Like, don't let me, like, help me get this right. And it was really cool. There's only one word in the song that I insisted stay Natalie, is when she says respirare. There's a one part where she says respirare, and I really wanted to keep that Natalie being Natalie, like have its little imperfections. But the rest, she just nailed it, and she really gave it 110%. And it was amazing. We went to perform it many times, a few times in Italy, and the response to that song was incredible. And Italy loves Natalie. I mean, they have a tremendous love for her, and
that whole Mediterranean belt. That
yeah,
they really do get into that melancholy, don't they? They've connected, and they're not letting go of her.
For sure.
Let's go back. Let's go back to the album. This was you said you wrote this before your dad died. After?
No, just after he passed.
Just after. And this is a very important piece of music for you, both artistically and personally. I want to know, as you were writing this and performing it and going through all the emotions of it, were you able to look into your relationship with your father that was?
Very much so, in the sense that I was able to come to terms with, we sort of make people up, we create the narrative. The only person that will ever truly know oneself is oneself. Everything I will never know how somebody perceives me, or how somebody hears my laughter, or how somebody hears my voice, or I will never understand that. And when it comes to others, you sort of create this thing. And I was with my father when he passed away. The last 2 months, I literally was at his bedside. And it was an amazing experience to really come to that realization that, you do create those around you, including your parents. You create a narrative, you create an idea, you can lift them up to great expectations, or you can even destroy them with a simple story that you tell yourself. And when you lose them, the one thing that I really noticed was, for better or for worse, my father and I were very tight, we were very close, but there was a lot of challenges. It wasn't, we didn't go through life skipping hand in hand. There was a lot of this. We confronted each other, we challenged each other a lot, we disappointed each other, we impressed each other, we were proud of each other. There was a lot of back and forth. But the one thing I really noticed when he passed, I had this like those cartoon holes when they run through a wall, like, those. I had one of those of his figure in my soul. There was just this huge hole. And I remember at first being like, it was overwhelming. It was nauseating. It was like standing on the top of a cliff. But then I was so grateful to him for, I had this space that now I got to fill. Now I got to fill with the love of my children, my wife, my friends, but I also had so much to give that I used to give him. And now with that being removed, it was like he had prepared me. He had like given me this sort of thing. And now that he was gone, it was like, go and do what you will with that. It's up to you now. And that's where the music came from. It was suddenly like, it was a celebration. It wasn't sad. Of course, there was moments of tremendous sadness. But even feeling that sadness is a reassurance of it's an affirmation of love, and I think the sadness you feel with loss is always an affirmation of the love that was felt. And that's what this album was.
Did your father have a relationship with music?
Oh, yes, very much so. Not as a musician like me. He uses music. Like me, I use music. And he was very much the one that would, when we'd be driving, if a song came on, he'd almost pull over to be like, listen to this lyric. Listen to what he
That's
says
where
here.
you get it from.
Yeah, totally, 100%. I remember silly things like I remember when the first time he played me A Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash, or Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. Chris Christopherson was a big thing of his, but all the Italian music I ever grew up listening to was my father's. Lucio Battisti, Lucio Dalla, De Gregori, Venditti, Baglioni, Mina, Patti Bravo, Ornella Vannoni, all these Italian artists. That was all my father's music. And it wasn't just music. He would always, even when we would go to Portofino as kids in the summer, he would always put on a song. And as we were driving, he would tell us a story about some great love affair he had in his teenage years or in his 20s, or like the first romance, or the first time he got beaten up, or the first time he fell off his Vespa, or the first time he crashed his car. He would have all these stories associated with songs. All these firsts, bravo. All these firsts. And they were always associated with a song. And so my sister and I would listen. And it's funny because I find myself doing the same with my kids. And my wife can't stand it. She's like, oh, shut up. Stop telling us. But my kids will always ask for these stories. They'll be like, what? Tell us about that time. And put it with a certain song. So it's funny. But yeah, that album was a real... it was a way of connecting to him. And it was funny because I went to Italy straight after he passed. And this was the moment I decided to make an Italian album. Was when I landed, I was very unprepared and unaware with what an impact it would make. I remember just flying into Milan airport, and that was probably the first time I probably cried. Because usually my father would pick me up. I was so used to my father waiting for me at the airport, and this was one of the first times. It was the first time I was going to land that he wouldn't be there. And I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't prepared that at all. Luckily, one of my closest friends was there to pick me up instead. But I remember in that moment arriving, and every man kind of smelt like him, looked like him, sounded like him. I saw him everywhere. And it made me want to be in Italy a lot. And I remember phoning my wife and saying, I think I have to make an Italian album. And she was like, okay. She was fabulous and didn't only, push me to do so. But I think she was very much aware too that essentially what I wanted to be was in Italy a lot because it made me feel close to him. That was a lot of the reason too. It wasn't just the music. It was also the fact that I was making an Italian album in Italy. And that was my way of also rediscovering my own Italianness. Who was I now without him? Like, this was my turn. Like, now I am the Italian. Yeah, essentially, yeah. I am the one that's passing on this part of our tradition, our culture, our heritage to my children. And that was
Is there a concern about moving through the grief and just moving through it and letting go of the physical pain you speak of? Is there a concern that by doing that, you may let go the memory of that person?
There's definitely
Is that why we hold on, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. There's a fear of it, and it's sometimes sad. I'll suddenly realize I haven't thought about my father in a few days or something, and that'll make me sad, like that I'm forgetting. Although, it's hard because my father was so impactful. And I'm turning into him. Like, I smell like him. I wake myself up in the night because I snore like him. Like I'm the way I'm talking to my kids. Stuff comes out of my mouth, and I'm like, "What was that?" I sit like him. My father always used to sit like this, and I always used to make fun of him as a child because I used to think that looks so uncomfortable. But now, whenever I sit at a chair, I'll find myself. I'll probably have done this a few times during this, like little things like that, and I will. And so it'll never truly be gone. But yes, you do. I do think you're up. I do think what you said. There's a lot to be said for what you're saying. I might have held on to it a little bit longer than I probably had to because I didn't want to let it go. And I will hold on to it forever. And that's what this album kind of did. It also made that moment an immortal moment for me. Like that's something that will never go. Now there is this album. There is the music for that experience, for that moment. Not about my father's passing, not about my father dying or anything like that. More about that realization of what my father was to me and what his culture, what he brought to me, and the music he gave me, and the Italian, everything Italian. That was all him. And that album is definitely a celebration, and also just like it's set in stone. That will never go.
You've chosen War Child as your social cause. Why have you chosen War Child?
Why would I not? We talked briefly about what's going on in the world today, and without going too intimate of it, growing up as my grandparents were refugees during the war. My grandfather was a partisan during the war. We talk about war a lot, but essentially the one element that we should never discard and should be at the forefront is children within war zones, areas of conflict, so to speak. And I've worked with War Child now for almost 10 years. I went with them to Ukraine last year to visit the work they were doing there with the Roma Gypsy community, the Roma community that was sort of really abandoned in Ukraine during the time. And how children, we're seeing now in Gaza every single day, the numbers of children. We're seeing in the DRC. We're seeing in many areas the fact that children are still a part of conflict is something not we should be ashamed of. It's something that should not be ever, dismissed or overlooked. And War Child are on the front line of this, not only of trying to protect children in areas of conflict, but we very much sometimes forget that even when the conflict is over, the psychological damage done to children, the safety of children afterwards, the lack of education of children, sanitization of children afterwards is really not so much spoken about. And the reason I've supported War Child is because once the conflict is over, War Child stays. They don't just move on. And that's a big part of their organization, a big part of the fact that I love to work with them.
I say this to you as papa to papa. When children are politicized and weaponized, everybody loses.
100%.
Whitney Houston said it, in one of her songs. I believe the children are our future. At the time, I just remember it being a ballad, but now that I think about it, it really is. I look at those little bodies that I wake up to every morning.
Yeah.
And I open my fridge every day and I give thanks I have access to food to feed them. That does not fall silent on me. It's just, I am tired, but I open that fridge and it's full. And that is for me everything. As a father to daughter Connie, who's 13, Winter, how old's Winter?
Winter's 10.
10, same age as mine, and Celeste, she's 4, we know.
She just turned 4, yeah.
Congratulations. Wow, they say that 2's great, the third one pushes you over.
Oh no, man, 3 is the magic number. And I was really, we won't go into this. This is for another therapy session. But that's
for the next podcast.
Yes, podcast. I was very happy at 2. Let's just put it that way. I knew I could give 2 kids a good life, and I was panicky with 3 because it was, as a father, it's terrifying to love something so much. It's beyond words. But 3 has been a real magic number for us. And I think also because I'm older now. I had my first child when I was 26. So I, like every parent with the first one, you don't know what you're doing. And I'm not saying I know what I'm doing now, but I definitely I understand the concept of time a lot better now. I have a different concept of time. I don't know if I understand it, but you really cherish every moment because you know how quickly it passes. I can't believe I have a 13-year-old daughter. She is a little woman, and we are super close, but I know that the hanging out together is getting less and less and less, but hopefully she'll always want to hang out a bit, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I don't know. You cherish every moment. I'm very fortunate. I think we're both very fortunate. And
Very.
like you said, it doesn't fall deaf on us that I can, feed them, shelter them, that they live in a part of the world where they don't have many fears other than the own ones they create in their mind. You know what I mean? But there is no outside enemy, and I hope it stays this way. We're living in volatile times, and this is a reality we do have to think about for our children. And it's a reality we have to think about when we make our political choices, that I think we, as well as many parts of the world, especially in the West, have been a bit naive to, and maybe uneducated in it. And we think, oh, it won't happen to us again. It won't happen here. And that's very naive. And like I said, I was in Ukraine recently, and this is happening on European soil. And if somebody had said that to you, it's actually happening, and people still don't believe it's happening. That's how far out, that's how removed we are from reality sometimes, because of how fortunate we are. And we're quite stubborn with that. And I think it's something we do have to keep in mind moving forward.
As long as they keep listening to MJ and the Cranberries, I think they'll be fine. We have an MFK Fisher tradition, serve it forth tradition here at TFM, where our previous guest serves you a dish. Our previous guest is famed Australian florist Saskia Havicus of Grandiflora in Potts Point, who shares with you a dish her father cooked when there were large gatherings. It would be a paella that he would serve. I hope you like paella, because that's what she's given you.
I love it. We have a house in Formentera I go to. We love to escape to Formentera, which is an island just next to Ibiza. So big paella eaters in our family.
Perfect. What would you like to serve our next guest?
Have I told you anything already, or can I choose off the top of my head?
You can choose whatever you like.
I will do an amatriciana, which is a Roman
yes.
pasta. Spaghetti alla matriciana is my favorite, which is very simple. It's just tomato and guanciale, which is the cheek of a pig, with a lot of pecorino as well, and that's it. So that's what I would like to serve up to her. It's a typically Roman dish. I don't have any connections with Rome, other than the fact that it's one of my favorite cities in the whole world, but I don't have any family connections. But yeah, that's what I'm going to go for.
And would you serve a wine with that? What wine would you serve with?
Ooh, a nice bottle of Sassicaia, probably. If we're going really over the top. If we're throwing a super Tuscan in there, a nice bottle of Sassicaia or a bottle of Solaia, I would be different. I like all the Ayas, Ornellaia, Sassicaia, Solaia. So one of the Aya wines I'd have to put in there.
I'm going to pause and tell you who our next guest is. It's Sarah Wilson of I Quit Sugar. I don't know if you know her.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, she will be receiving your dish.
Well, I hope she's not quitting sugar before she has that wine.
I'm sure she'll find. This is Jack. Jack, this is your opportunity to ask me a question. Open slather.
Well, I was going to ask you about your first food memory, but I want to talk more about the father. About as a father. As a father, how important for you is food and connecting with your children? How do you connect those worlds?
Wow. I sometimes worry that one of my two are not connected to the food in the same way that I am. One is really just chomping at the bit to get to it. Is actually has your enthusiasm. It's got to get in, it's got to do, grab this, and he's going to cut himself or burn himself. But he's there, and so there's a big one and a little one, Leo and Dane. Leo's the big one.
What are the ages? How
10.
old are
They're twins. They're twins.
Oh, so I didn't realize they were twins. Oh, sweet.
Yes, I wish I was warned. No jokes. I knew they were always going to be twins. So anyway, the little one allows the big one to make his eggs for him. So it's me or his brother who lets make his eggs. And the little one is not really into food. So it's very hard to kind of impress on him because he's got other interests and passions. But on this road trip, I promised them McDonald's. And we did McDonald's, you've got to stop and charge the car. So I said, guys, you go in and order together. And they did it the first time. And then the second part of the road trip, I said, well, there was nothing to eat. You know what it's like traveling on a highway. It's McDonald's or
nothing. Yeah.
And so he had it the second time. That evening, the little one, who's not that much into food, he got very sick. And not food poisoning. He got coffee and throaty, and we don't eat that stuff. I mean, it's all fresh of everything, fortunately. And he took himself to bed because he was ready to build his Lego and do all this. He took himself to bed, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Papa, I don't think I ate properly. I think it's the 2-time McDonald's." He said, "You're right, Papa. All that food, that Mimi," my mother, because my mother has the farm. "You're so right." So it's through kind of my actions and that I impress on him, you know, that sort of stuff. But look, not everyone, Jack, has access to good music. Yeah. You know that. Not everyone has, and not everyone has access to, and not everyone likes cooking, and not everyone has an understanding for cooking. So it's a real benefit. Sorry, it's not a benefit. What's the better word for benefit? It's a real
privilege. Yeah.
Privilege to be able to have that. So when it comes to cooking and my kids, I just have to keep leading by example. And it's look, I cook every single one of their meals. We very rarely eat out. My mother helps a couple of nights a week, which is brilliant. But it's exhausting. It's exhausting being on top of their next snack, of their next, and explaining to them what packaged food is. They're 10. They want to have fun. They see what's in their other children's, their mate's lunchbox. And you don't want to deprive them, but at the same time, you don't want them to get sick and feel.
I know it is. Finding that balance is really difficult because my wife and I always have this discussion because my wife is very fabulously healthy with food. Not too much, not like where it's sort of an obsession, because we have friends who are that too, where you're like, all right, chill out. Like, it's just a kid, like let him have a piece of chocolate every now and then. But there's a lot to be said about, like, I see it even with some of my kids' friends. If they are from a very healthy household, they'll come here, and if they do see sweets, they're sort of like they turn into sort of drug addicts. And I'm like, whoa, easy, buddy. So it's about finding that balance. Like, we sometimes have naughty biscuits and stuff like that, and I always say to my wife, leave them out. Like, they'll figure out quickly that that's not good stuff. But if you keep putting it away, it becomes this forbidden treasure, and they'll sort of like build it up in their head. It's hard to find that balance, though. It is very hard.
Well, I fell over myself over Easter because I said to them, what eggs? Oh, Papa, it's too much sugar in eggs. Can we have Lego instead? And I was like, what am I going to eat? What am I going to raid?
So true. I mean, I'm a big Nutella junkie, and I try to use the kids as an excuse, but my wife knows it's very much for me. Like, I'm talking spoon straight into the mouth. I don't even need bread or anything. Like, I will literally sit and watch a film eating a jar of Nutella.
Jack, next year you release your 9th studio album, 20 years since your first. How has your storytelling changed over the 2 decades?
I don't know if my storytelling has changed. I think the stories have changed. I think I have a tremendous hunger for authenticity. It's a struggle to sometimes be truly honest and genuine, and it's so easy to sometimes get distracted by sparkly words or themes of grandeur. So I try to just keep it real. And you got to make an effort to do that. It's quite to stay truthful and to stay authentic. And that's what I hope with the next record. I think with age, you appreciate that a lot more. You become a lot more comfortable with being authentic, I think, too, with age. You stop trying. You stop caring what people think a little bit more. So that's where I am. I hope the next record is it's a coming of age, so to speak. It's taken me 20 years to come of age, and this will be it.
Giovanni, Carlo, Antonello Moretti, Savoretti, Donatello Versace. There's so many names in your name. I probably mixed them all up. I really honestly believe that your Frank Sinatra-like Renaissance flame will burn hard and strong long after they throw the dirt on your box. Grazie mille.
Grazie a te, man. Thank you so much for having me, buddy. Grazie.
That's it for this episode of 3 Food Memories.